And then I got to mute everybody. So I will unmute you, Greg. And then I will unmute Mr. Zolecki.
Yeah, actually, we have to do that. It comes across as you asking us to do it.
Okay.
And then Paul.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Alex Marks, Secretary for the Rocky Mountain Chapter of Society for American Baseball Research. Welcome to our 166th consecutive monthly luncheon. And we are very honored to have a couple special guests and presentations today. Our first guest is Mr. Todd Zolecki, who is currently the Philadelphia Phillies beat writer for MLB.com. He's written a number of books, which I will let our moderator today, Greg Petty, explain further, including one of our very beloved prodigal son, Mr. Roy Halladay. And I'm sure that they'll get into much details about that. We also have another special guest in terms of discussions, Mr. Dan Evans. I don't know if he's joined us yet, but he's a current Rocky Mountain board member, and he will give us kind of what his thoughts are on Mr. Tom. There he is, Mr. Tom ZABR, and the life and history as he knows him, since they had a very close relationship. So with that, before we hand it over to Mr. Petty to have his interview with Mr. Zolecki, I'll hand it over to our president, Mr. Paul Parker, to kind of go over any chapter business. Paul, go ahead.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, as always, for coordinating this, producing it, and also thank you to Mr. Petty for organizing the program. And thanks and welcome to everybody who has joined us on this SABR call today. As we all know, we're living in a parallel universe compared to what we used to live in terms of normal SABR activities. We march on, we carry on, we scratch our heads about a 60-game schedule, but we're doing the best we can. We're going to continue doing this. I thought it would be wonderful to get back when the time was right, to get back to, for those who were comfortable with it, to meeting in person in limited numbers with under very strict protocols at our old home of the Blake Street Tavern. But, and we're going to start that in October, but I don't think that the time is right yet. I just don't feel that that's an appropriate thing to happen with the group. And as president, I've heard many different opinions. I feel as though I'm kind of the recipient of the spectrum of opinions on this, but I had to make the call, and I think we are going to wait to meet in person until the facts on the ground, as they say, warrant our doing so. So I just wanted to let you know about that. For those of you who may not know, our annual banquet was canceled for this year. Our venue host was the Colorado Rockies, and they were in no way able to stage an event for November, this coming November. So one other note before I turn it back over, before I introduce our moderator for today. I'm thinking now I'm really coming along nicely in my remedial Zoom host classes, and I'm going to give it a try for the board. So look for a board Zoom meeting first week of October, and perhaps that works okay. Then we will try to do that at least quarterly, and it's going to be for those of board members who are on this call. Alex, Greg, Kurt, myself. Did I miss anybody? Oh, Dan. I'm sorry. It's always tough to tell with Dan because it's a still photo. I don't know if he's, if he's a robocall or what is that. But he looks like he's having fun on the slopes. But anyway, look for an open agenda Zoom board meeting first week of October. And that's about it for the chapter update. And I'd like to, I turn it over to Greg now, right?
Right.
Mr. Rocky Mountain SABR board member and a son of the great state of Illinois. Mr. Greg Petty for today's interview and program with Mr. Todd Zolecki. And again, nice to meet you, Todd.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Greg, it's all yours.
Thank you, Paul. The genesis of this program started when I saw Todd on MLB Now. And Todd, I don't know whether you know when you spoke, but I'm guessing that was about 3 months ago, 2.5 months ago or so.
Yeah, it was late July, yeah.
And I thought Todd was, one, really articulate, and two, he had just written a book, The Biography of Roy Halladay. And I thought, wow, our chapter would have some interest in that he's one of only 2 Hall of Famers from the state of Colorado. And Roy, of course, was recently voted into the Hall of Fame. So our friend, Thomas Harding, knew Todd, asked him if he'd be interested. He said he would be. And so I was really happy when we were going to do this last month, but the Phillies went from a night game to an afternoon game. So Todd had to say he couldn't do it because he's the Phillies beat writer. So he knows all things Phillies. And while he's doing beat writing from his home, it looks like he does join. He has to leave us toward the end of the hour because he has to do some pick up some interviews that the Phillies do at the hour. So I'm going to show you the book called Doc, The Life of Roy Halladay. And the rest of the program is going to be this. We're going to talk to Todd about the book. It's only going to be an interview at the beginning. We will then open it up for Q&A about that. And depending on where the time is, we have 2 other things. Dan Evans is going to talk about Tom Seaver, who recently died. And Dan got to know Tom really well and was doing White Sox stuff when Tom won his 300th game with the White Sox. And he became a friend of Tom. Tom Seaver had the highest Hall of Fame voting percentage for 24 years, from 1992 to 2016 when Ken Griffey Jr. went in. So Seaver was not just a Hall of Famer, he was a premier Hall of Famer. And Dan has some great stories. And then we're going to talk about the playoffs. We will talk about the Rockies' chances, but we have people here who can discuss what the playoffs are going to look like. They are going to be different this year in many ways, and I think that's interesting too. Maybe we'll talk about the season also, but I want to have that conversation.
Greg, Greg, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I just add one thing that I forgot to mention? If there is an opportunity for question and answer after Greg and Todd discuss, and then also with Dan's presentation on Tom Seaver, please present your questions via the chat box function. It should be a function available on your screen, and just type it in and we will get to them as much as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, it may be a while before we get to questions in the interview, but we will pick them up eventually. And then after the interview, you'll get to ask questions live if you prefer to do it that way. So Todd, can you tell us when you got connected with baseball? Give us a little bit of, well, even your earlier background so we know where you come from.
Yeah, so I grew up in Wisconsin, a suburb of Milwaukee, and baseball was kind of like my first love in regards to sports. And I was 7 years old when the Brewers went to the '82 World Series. So that was kind of like peak kid, memories, excitement, all that stuff. So like 1982, I can remember Robin Yount's batting average in '82, Paul Molitor, I can give you the '82 Brewers lineup almost verbatim, and based on platoon splits, etc. Like I was crazy about that team. And so that kind of started my love of baseball. And also started my love of kind of like writing about baseball. I just was like, wow, there's people that actually get paid to write about this and go on TV and talk about this. And maybe this is something that I could pursue. So I fast forward several years, I went to the University of Minnesota, got a degree in journalism, worked for the student newspaper there, covered Gophers baseball, which has had some big time baseball players in the past, Paul Molitor, Dave Winfield, Terry Steinbach. So they have a pretty solid tradition for a northern school. And got a job outside Chicago at a small suburban paper outside Chicago, and got to cover the 98 Cubs, kind of like off and on. That was the Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire year. Was that the year? Yeah, the Sammy Sosa.
What was your paper?
It was called the Northwest Herald. It's in
Oh yeah, very familiar with it.
Yep. And so I actually was at the game where Mark McGwire hit the 60-second home run down at Busch Stadium. I drove down there, and so that was kind of a cool moment for me. And then I ended up getting an internship at the Philadelphia Inquirer covering high school sports. One thing led to another. They needed a Phillies writer. I applied, and I've been covering. Became the Phillies beat writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer in 2003, and have been covering them ever since. I joined MLB.com in 2009, so I got to cover the Phillies' World Series title in 2008. And then of course, 5 straight division titles, losing to the Rockies in 2007 in the first round there, the year the Rockies went. And in 2009, the Phillies and Rockies again played in the first round. And I remember one of the games got snowed out. So, I've had my experience. Yeah, I've had my experiences with Denver and Colorado baseball, and but I love baseball, and like I said, I've been writing about it for a long time. And so, since 2003, I've been covering the Phillies, and we'll see what happens to them this year in terms of postseason.
Well, you've also written a couple of other books besides the one I just talked about. You want to mention those?
Yeah, I wrote this. It's kind of, I wrote a book called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Best Worst Moments in Phillies History. It's kind of one of those books you pick up and you flip through, and depending on what you want to read that day. That was the first book I wrote. And then the second book I wrote was a book called The Rotation, which was about the 2011 Phillies, myself and Jim Salisbury, who's one of the big baseball writers out here. The year that following the offseason where they signed Cliff Lee, so the Phillies were going into the 2011 season with peak Roy Halladay, peak Cliff Lee, peak Cole Hamels, Roy Oswalt, and people are saying, wow, this could be one of the greatest rotations in baseball history. So we pitched the idea of kind of doing a season with these 4 pitchers, and a publisher was like, yeah, absolutely, because if they win the World Series, which they're favored to do, this could be a big seller. Well, of course, they end up losing in the first round to the Cardinals, which has actually became a part of the second book, the Roy Halladay book, or the third book, the Roy Halladay book. And, which it was a disappointment at the time for sure, but that was my second book called The Rotation. We still got some good feedback from it, but it just didn't do as well, obviously, because in Philadelphia, nobody wants to read about the team that just pulled your heart out from you.
Right. It would have been a real big seller in Philadelphia.
If they would have done what they were supposed to do, we were like, oh, this is gonna be great for us. I can get my bathroom redone, or whatever. You know what I mean? And it did not happen. But that was, those were my first 2 years getting to know Roy Halladay and covering Roy Halladay, and that kind of led me ultimately to the third book, which is why you had me invited me on today.
Okay. Well, we'll follow up on that. I do have to mention, you said the University of Minnesota. As I remember, the long-term coach there was Jerry Kindle. Is that right?
Yeah, Jerry Kindle. And then when I was there, John Anderson was the head coach, and I think he still might be the head coach. I've kind of lost touch, but he was the head coach for a long time. And he was coaching some guys like Denny Nagel, Kerry Lightenberg. They've had some other. Wow. Yeah, they've had some other big leaguers that have come through, not of the ilk of Paul Molitor and Dave Winfield, but they've still had for Northern school, cold weather school, still put out some pretty good baseball players.
Well, I mentioned Kendall because I've got his 1958 baseball card for the Cubs. So I always followed that. Roy Halladay, what made you want to write a biography about Roy?
Well, first of all, he just had such a great baseball career, right? He was going to go into the Hall of Fame, and players like that usually have, somebody usually writes a biography about him. But that really didn't interest me because, quite frankly, I've read enough baseball biographies about Hall of Famers, and they're kind of like, then this year this happened, and then this year this happened, and there really wasn't anything really that they were kind of just, they were interesting. There was biographical, but I thought what was interesting about Roy were two things. One is that he was like this superstar prospect coming up, and then he had one of the worst seasons ever in baseball history for a pitcher. He had a 10.64 ERA with the Blue Jays in 2000. To this day, it's still the single season highest ERA in baseball history of any pitcher that's ever thrown 50 or more innings in a season. So you can make the argument that no one's ever had a worse pitching season than Roy Halladay, right? And then he gets sent all the way down to A-ball in 2001. And then he changed his entire career around. And that always just amazed me, to go from that high coming up to that low and then having a Hall of Fame career. But the second thing that always really interested me is how often he talked about the mental side of the game, and sports psychology and mental skills, and the late great sports psychologist Harvey Dorfman, and how much it impacted him, to the point where after his career was over, we talked to him once in spring training. He's like, I'm going to go back to school because I kind of want to carry on Harvey's work. And that really struck me. And it really struck me because usually guys that have the career and the success that Roy has, Hall of Famer or otherwise, they might get into broadcasting, or they might become a club ambassador. You play golf with some high profile clients of the team that you played for, or they might just golf and fish and go on great vacations and, just enjoy their life. But he was like, no, I'm going to become a mental skills coach. And that was just amazing to me, to have that desire to help other people, because I think, he remembered how much he struggled coming up and how much he struggled throughout his life on that side of things. And he was like, well, I know there's other people out there, so maybe I can use these conversations and that I had with Harvey over the years, and maybe help out some other people. I thought that was a really cool, noble thing. And so that was kind of like my second motivator for writing the book.
Well, and just for everybody, I've read the book and recommend the book. Your story about Roy is, it's not maybe totally unvarnished, but pretty much it tells his life story and doesn't try to glamorize some of the challenges he had, both at the low points when he had a 10.64 ERA, and then after his career ended, or as his career was ending, and then into his post-career stuff, and even into the final, his final days. So I appreciated that. And Todd also doesn't use the word I in his book. He obviously covered Halladay. He could have given his observations, but there is a journalistic integrity and objectivity about it that I really appreciated.
Thank you.
Let's start with Roy, where we're connected with him, which would be, as he goes through his young years, eventually for Arvada West, but even before that. Can you tell us how he got into baseball and how he developed? Because
his dad kind of played baseball competitively, not professionally, but competitively. And, he just had this strong desire to see if he could, for lack of a better word, I guess, if he could make Roy Halladay, his son, a baseball player, whether it be a college player or a pro player or whatever. He wanted to see if he could kind of turn him and make him into a baseball player. And so Roy started playing baseball very early. The famous story, which I get into in the book, is, they were living in one of the Denver suburbs, and then they moved to Arvada because, and part of the move was to find a house that had a basement long enough where he could build a kind of a mobile bullpen and throw bullpen sessions in the winter. Because, you know, I'm from Wisconsin. I know what winters are like. You guys live in Denver and Colorado, and you know what winters are like. And Roy's dad was like, I want my son to train year round, so I have to find a basement where he could throw year round. And so that was kind of the legendary story. So he built this this portable pitcher's mound. He hung chain link fences from the beams in the ceiling in the basement, and, you know, built a batting cage essentially. And Roy trained year round to become a pitcher. And you know, at one point, Roy's dad bought Nolan Ryan's Pitcher's Bible, which came out in the early 90s. And basically that was kind of Roy's how-to book on how to train to be a pitcher, from lifting weights to stretching exercises to throwing exercises and things like that. And I don't know if you could say it was a job, but, you know, Roy trained for baseball a lot more than maybe some of his friends did that went to Arvada West. You know, it was something he always had to do.
Did you get the impression that Roy welcomed that, or was it a real pushing father that made that happen?
I think his dad definitely pushed him into it and made him stay on it. You know, I think Roy didn't know any other life, because that was the only life he knew. So, you know, in terms of, he might have just thought that this was kind of normal, I guess. It was hard on him, no doubt. You know, there was, you know, sometimes he couldn't go and hang out with his friends or whatever, because he had to work out that night, or he had to throw a bullpen that night. So it was challenging for him at times. He felt a lot of pressure to live up to expectations. You know, I talked to his sister Heather, who was great. And she said, yeah, sometimes there were some uncomfortable car rides home where Roy didn't play well in a little league game or high school game, and was kind of getting an earful from dad for not doing the job that he was supposed to do and had trained to do. So, but on the other hand, you know, Roy would say, hey, without my dad, I wouldn't be where I am today, because, you know, he pushed me so hard. And in talking to Roy's widow, Brandy, and again, Roy's sister, Heather, they sort of, you know, they kind of wondered that as well. Like, on one hand, without his dad, he probably doesn't go into the Hall of Fame and have the career he had. But, you know, also without being pushed so hard, maybe he has a different outlook and feels differently about himself, and maybe that affected him as well.
Yeah, the two things that come through in your book are his skill set and his work ethic, but also this kind of pressure that he felt to excel. And eventually, when we get to Tom Seaver, we're going to have two Hall of Fame pitchers, and their philosophy and their attitude about life was just worlds apart. So there are different ways to get there, but Roy's path wasn't necessarily easy, it seemed to me. What about then his production there in high school? Was he always considered to be a prime prospect, or?
Yeah, well, he threw a no-hitter, like the first start he ever had his freshman year. And now I'm blanking on the high school, but it was a rival high school right next to Arvada West. So he was always kind of like, wow, this guy is good. And I talked with Mark Johnson, who is I don't know if he still is the coach at Cherry Creek High School, but a longtime high school coach at Cherry. Okay, yeah. So he, you know, I talked with his son who played there, you know, when Roy was coming up, and they, you know, his son Tyler said, he's like, Roy, everybody knew about Roy Halladay coming up. Like, he was like the one guy that, you know, in Little League feels like, oh man, see that guy's Roy Halladay. He goes hard. So he always had that reputation, and it did not take long for scouts, once he got to high school, to start following him around everywhere and watching him pitch. So he, you know, and when I talked with Roy's dad, he said, you know, at one point I just kind of hoped, like, yeah, maybe he could get a college scholarship out of this. Like, maybe he could go to Arizona or Arizona State, and he was signed to go to Arizona. But too many scouts were coming around saying, you're going to go really high in the draft. You're going to make some money here. And then once that became clear, Roy was like, okay, I'm not going to college. I'm going to sign and become a pro early.
How did that draft go then?
The draft went really well. No, so he went, he fell down to because he was a high school pitcher, and high school pitchers are kind of risky, and it's so hard to gauge on who's going to be good and who's not going to be good. But he fell all the way down to 17th at the Blue Jays, and it's just funny talking. The Phillies were actually thinking about drafting him. They ended up taking this outfielder by the name of Reggie Taylor, and the only reason why they were like, all right, if Reggie's not there at 13, we're taking Roy Halladay. Well, the Pirates, they thought the Pirates were going to take Reggie Taylor. Well, the Pirates threw everybody, this curveball and took this high school shortstop, I believe. And so the Phillies were like, oh my gosh, Reggie Taylor's going to follow us. I can't believe our good luck. Mm-hmm. We're taking Reggie Taylor. Roy Halladay kind of falls to the Blue Jays. And one of the reasons why he fell to the Blue Jays is because they had some great scouts on him, including Roy's kind of personal mentor, Buzz Campbell, who's also, he was his personal coach, pitching coach, but also was a scout for the Blue Jays. And Buzz is like, I think you guys should take this guy if he falls to you. And then another scout, another area cross-checker, Tim Wilkin, he was a big Roy Halladay fan. In fact, he said in the draft room, leading up to the draft, he said he lost a friendship.
I remember that from your book.
He said I lost a friendship in that room, and it wasn't like, sometimes people embellish the stories a little bit, and then you're like, I don't remember that. But Gord Ash, who was the Toronto Blue Jays general manager at the time, offered this on his own before I even talked to Tim. He's like, yeah, Tim Wilkin. He got really heated talking about Roy in that draft room. I remember he was like really pushing hard for Roy. And then Tim basically confirmed it without even me bringing up the Gord Ash anecdote. He's like, yeah, I was in hard on Roy Halladay, and they got him.
Well, you're mentioning 3 or 4 names here, and I want to let everybody know, and I hope I remember to say it again. Your book is full of quotes from people because you did a lot of interviewing. Do I remember it was 100 people or something like that?
Yeah, it was. I talked to at least 100 people. 110, 115, definitely into the hundreds though, the 100s.
So when you get this book, it gives a lot of perspectives about Halladay. Now you mentioned Buzz Campbell, and I'll bet some of the people in our audience here know who he was, if not knew him. So would you tell us a little bit about Buzz, because he was the first great influence other than Roy's dad on Roy, right?
Yeah, but Buzz was this Colorado pitching guru, and I talked with Brad Lidge about him. You mentioned the other Colorado Hall of Famer, Goose Gossage. I talked with Goose about him, and it's funny because sometimes when you call these people, cold call them, you might not get a call back. But I said, hey, I'm calling about Buzz Campbell. Can you give me a call? And Goose Gossage called me right back. It's like, I loved Buzz Campbell. So the way it was described to me almost was Buzz was the Mr. Miyagi of pitching coaches in Colorado for years and years. Like, he was the guy that if you had any talent, high school, college, pro, if you were having some problems, you wanted to work with Buzz Campbell. He just had this knack for breaking down somebody. In fact, even Brandy Halladay said this. She said, and I talked with Josh Bard, who's a longtime big leaguer, former Yankees bench coach, Scott Ellerton, longtime big league pitcher. They all kind of said the same thing. Is like Buzz could he wouldn't even watch and see where the pitch was going. He would just kind of watch your delivery and stop you midway through and say, this is what you're doing wrong, almost before you would throw the pitch. He just had this really sixth sense about him. And he also just kind of made things really simple for pitchers. When I talked with Mark Johnson, the Cherry Creek coach, he said, one time I was in this indoor training facility. I think, in fact, Mark Johnson used to own it outside of Denver. He said, there's this one pitching coach. He was trying to make a name for himself in pro ball. I said, I overheard him talking. He says, Buzz and I overheard this pitching coach talking to a high school pitcher talking about horizontal rotation and thrust and vertical twists and this and that, and, you know, all pelvic loading and whatnot. And Bus came over and said, son, just turn your billfold pocket towards this way and then throw the pitch. And the guy immediately started pitching better. So he had this really kind of kind way about him. He was a great listener. He didn't shout. In fact, everybody I talked to said the thing about Bus is you really had to listen closely to him, because he would talk in this really low voice. And he would say, just try this, try this, try this. And it wasn't like this Joel Sargent coach, and I think because of Roy's dad being so hard driving, Roy really took to Bus, because Bus was kind of the opposite. He was kind of a grandfatherly type guy to Roy. And they really connected to the point where when Roy got drafted by the Blue Jays, he bought Bus a grandfather clock as kind of like a thank you for all your years of support. And then when Roy finally made it to the big leagues, in '98, he bought Bus a satellite dish so Bus could watch his games for the Blue Jays while sitting at home in Colorado.
The things that came through to me from that was, yes, what you just said about Roy had to welcome that somebody that he could talk to that wasn't going to be so intense and that would be supportive. He also kept in touch with Bus after he got to the big leagues, and would talk to him at times, although he ended up with other people that were important to him. And the third thing is, Campbell, especially with his high school guys, didn't charge them. I mean,
yeah, that's right.
Just a remarkable guy from that. So the Blue Jays draft him. Can you describe briefly, I suppose, how he went through to the major leagues, and then this tremendous season where everything goes wrong?
Yeah, he was a pretty fast riser through the Blue Jays' system. He finally makes his debut in '98, second start of his career. He's 1 out away from throwing a no-hitter. Then Bobby Higginson from the Tigers just pulls a fastball for a home run. Actually, no, I'm sorry. He hits an opposite field home run for spoil the no-hitter. He's okay in '99, and then in 2000, everything just falls apart on him. That's the 10.64 ERA year, because Roy used to throw straight over the top like this, and so he would throw basically a four-seamer and a curveball, or a fastball and a curveball. And the fastball, because he was straight over the top and the way his delivery is, it just kind of came straight into hitters, and so they got just unbelievable looks at the baseball. And he also couldn't throw his curveball for strikes. So hitters would just go, okay, this guy's basically a two-pitch pitcher. I can just totally dismiss the curveball because I know he can't throw it first. And I can just wait for him to throw a meatball down the middle of the plate.
Mm-hmm.
And as he started to struggle, he lost all of his confidence. He goes into spring training of 2001 thinking, I'm going to get this thing turned around. He's actually worse in spring training of 2001. That's when Buck Martinez was the new Blue Jays manager. And people are like, oh my gosh, is this guy going to be a huge bust? What's going on? They send him down to A-ball. All the way down to A-ball, which you don't see that much nowadays. And they sent him all the way down to A-ball because they said, if we send him to AAA, he's not really going to work on anything. He's just going to be like, I just got to have a couple good starts and I'll be back up. They wanted to send him a message that you have to totally rebuild things. And so they sent him down to Dunedin, and he did not pitch well in Dunedin. He was had like a 3.7 ERA in a few appearances. And you say 3.7, that's not that bad, but when you're 22 years old and you've been in the big leagues a few years and you're still getting hit by high A-ball guys, that's not very good. And so they then promoted him to AA in Knoxville. Roy thought it was a promotion. Well, he ends up meeting this guy there by the name of Mel Queen, who was kind of like the Blue Jays' Mr. Fix-It.
And Mel Queen becomes the second big influence in his pitching life, doesn't he?
Yeah, Mel Queen does because Roy says, hey, Mel, how are you doing? He was his pitching coach in '98 with the Blue Jays, and Mel Queen just immediately laid into him and said, if you don't change, you're going to be out of the big leagues by the end of the month. you stink. You need to get your head on straight. Everything you're doing is wrong. Unless you want to be known as a failure, you got to listen to everything I say. You can't do everything the same. And Roy was like, okay. And so basically what Mel Queen told him to do, because like I told you, he was coming straight over the top. They used to call him Iron Mike, like the old pitching machine. Mel Queen basically said to him, throw a sidearm for me. And Roy's like, what? He's like, throw a sidearm for me. So Roy he thought he was like right here. He was actually only like right here. He was 3/4. It felt like a lot to Roy. Well, next thing you know, the ball starts moving. It starts cutting and darting in and out of the strike zone. And Roy's like, oh my gosh. And to make a long story short is that was all it was. Mel taught him how to throw a cutter. The curveball worked a lot better. Now Roy was throwing the sinker, the 2-seam fastball, and everything was moving. And within a few months, he was back in the big leagues. And it was like an overnight success, other than he was still having to work on the mental side of the game.
Yeah. So now his pitching form is, really, I don't remember anything like this where a guy ends up now with 2 or 3 pitches just from a month with 2 months with a new pitching coach.
Right. Everything had changed for him. He went from this straight over the top meatball fastball guy, can't throw a curveball for strike, to now he didn't have, because now he had movement on his pitches. Before he would like try to be super fine and try to dot the strike zone. But now he could just kind of like throw his sinker towards the middle of the plate, and it would run in on righties or would run away from lefties. Same thing with, the cutter, it would have some movement, and it just, he said his confidence just shot through the roof at that point.
Now he had a part of a season there. I don't remember how much of the season. He did get up to the major leagues that year, right?
He pitched very well that year in 2001. Yeah, he came back and it was like, okay, we got something now. Absolutely.
And the next year, he was really good.
Last year, yeah, that 2002 season, he was really good. In fact, he was so good, he probably should have won the Cy Young Award that year. But, voters at the time looked at things a little bit differently. They voted based on, whoever had the highest win totals, almost like a shoo-in to win the Cy Young. But Roy, actually, if you look at like baseball B-WAR from Baseball Reference, like he had the highest WAR that year of any American League pitcher, but he didn't even get a single Cy Young vote that year in 2002, because I think he was like 16-7. Even though he was pitching in the American League East, going through the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Orioles, and the Rays, but he didn't get a single Cy Young vote.
He was 19-7 with a 2.93. Yeah,
and think about that. How many, like 200 plus innings. He was amazing and didn't get a single Cy Young vote. Pretty wild.
Yeah, although he was an all-star. So he goes from being in Class A the year before to being an all-star and nearly a 20-game winner. And now he's off to the races, isn't he?
Yeah, he is off to the races. And what kind of propelled him to that next level is his work with Harvey Dorfman, the sports psychologist. His wife, Brandy, found the book, The Mental ABCs of Pitching, and he really committed himself to changing himself mentally, because he used to say how he would go out before a game and be like, okay, so the only way I can not feel like a total failure as a person, I have to go 7 innings, 3 runs or fewer. I have to do that. Otherwise he legitimately would not feel good about himself. And so he was not thinking about the next pitch he was throwing to somebody. He was thinking about the big picture. And Harvey taught him to only worry about the next pitch. Even if you throw the best cutter of your life and it gets crushed off the left field wall, forget about it and focus on the next pitch. That's the only thing that can help you out. And along with a lot of other things, but that really kind of, the Mel Queen stuff got his pitches moving, but the Harvey Dorfman stuff is what really started taking him into another stratosphere.
And Dorfman became sort of a guru to a select group of pitchers, didn't he? Or even players.
Oh yeah, pitchers and players. Greg Maddux, Jamie Moyer, Raul Ibanez. Brad Lidge worked with him a little bit. A lot of pitchers and players. Alex Rodriguez, I think, even worked with him. There were a lot of pitchers and players that worked with Harvey, and what they liked about him is that he told them like it is. Like he helped them out, but he also held them accountable. It wasn't like Raul Ibanez, I think, said Harvey wasn't the sports psychologist. It was like, close your eyes and picture yourself in a lake on a boat with a cool breeze. He was not that guy. He was the guy that said, listen, you're a Major League Baseball player. Act like one. It's normal for you to feel scared or nervous or whatever, but you're a Major League Baseball player. You need to start acting like one. And Roy took to that message quite a bit.
And he read that book time after time, and he continually, maybe not every day, but he talked to Dorfman a lot during those years.
He did throughout until Harvey passed away in 2011. They talked all the time. They emailed constantly. Anytime Roy had a question, they would talk. They would talk after every start. They would talk before starts, or at least email before starts. And that relationship continued for a long time.
Yeah, until Harvey died, which, as I remember, Roy took hard, and other people took hard.
Yeah, absolutely. That was, he was like a second father to Roy, the way it was explained to me. So he was, actually Roy Halladay never missed a day of work, but he went to Harvey's funeral in North Carolina because he meant so much to him.
What, I don't want to detail year by year because, he has this great career now. What would you like to tell us about Roy's career? The one thing that sticks out for me from your story is how riveted he was. Fairly narrow in terms of the way he did things. Boy, he had to do things just the same way, but he worked so hard. Nobody outworked Roy.
Nobody outworked Roy, and that came from Harvey. Harvey said, confidence is a feeling. Feelings are feelings. He's like, going into starts, I feel confident. I feel good about myself. He's like, the only thing you can know for sure how you're going to feel when you're out there is, did I prepare or not? Did you do your work? Yes. Did you do your work? No. And so that's why Roy, everybody talked about his work ethic, but that's where Roy got his confidence from. So by running, by weightlifting, by studying hitters for hours and hours and hours, that's where he got his confidence from when he stepped on the mound. If he said, you know what, I'm facing the Rays this week. They stink. I know these guys pretty well. He would not be able to get on the mound and feel like he could beat the Rays. It didn't matter how good they were or how bad they were. If he said, I don't feel like running this week. I got to take it easy. I don't feel like lifting weights this week. You know what, he wouldn't feel good about himself. That's where he got his confidence from, was knowing that every hitter that I'm going to face today is not as prepared as I am. And that kind of was his feeling going into that postseason no-hitter against the Reds in 2011. That was his first postseason start of his career. And he was like, he felt more prepared and more confident that he ever had in his entire life because he had 9 days to prepare. And he just knew that nobody in the Reds was going to be able to outthink him, outprepare him. And so he just went into that game with so much confidence, it was out of this world.
And what happened in that game?
Yeah, he was unbelievable. He walked Jay Bruce in the 5th inning, and that was the only base runner he allowed. And he just stuck with his plan and kept attacking. He wasn't nibbling at all, which is his kind of his MO when he pitched. Harvey and him always said, a perfect game for Roy Halladay. A perfect game was 27 pitches and 27 outs, not 27 strikeouts and 27 outs. He wanted every hitter to swing at the first pitch, beat it into the ground, and get an out. And that's kind of what he did throughout most of his career. He didn't have crazy strikeout numbers, but I would love now to have the StatCast and exit velo numbers to see what kind of weak contact Roy Halladay generated throughout his career. I would just love to know those numbers because they must have been off the charts.
Well, I'm looking at some statistics, by the way, though. Think about folks how many innings guys pitch. We want guys now to pitch 200 innings, although in fairness, we just had a guy who threw 300 innings, which was the first time in a long, long time. But Halladay's throwing 246, 250, 266, 239. Not many people are throwing 266 innings.
Almost never anymore. And I think that's because nowadays the game is so much, the 3 true outcomes, strikeout, walk, home run. And again, Roy didn't believe in that. He could get strikeouts if he wanted to, but he wanted to keep his pitch count as efficient as possible so he could pitch in as deep into games as possible. Like that was what he prepared for throughout the entire year, off season, spring training, in season. His goal was to go 9 innings every single time he went out there, and he felt disappointed when he didn't.
Yeah, you've given us such a good idea. To me, it's so foreign to say, well, if I'm prepared, I'm confident. But if I don't feel prepared, then I've lost my confidence, as opposed to just getting your confidence through maybe results or something like that.
Yeah, like Roy always just felt that, if he did well, he's like, I'm paid to pitch well. That's what I'm supposed to do, So like his part was, in his mind almost, he is being paid to work really, really hard so he is ready to pitch in those games. And, he took that to heart.
Two things, and I'm going to summarize this because I want you to tell us sort of at the end of his career about that, and then we're going to have questions because I'm taking a long time here. But
that's right.
It is true that Roy didn't big league guys. He was open to young people, but he also wasn't easy to get along with at times either.
Yeah, because he was so robotic almost in how he moved. Before starts, people knew do not talk to Roy. Like he would go into this zone and you just did not puncture that cocoon of preparation that he was in. But when he was not in that zone, he would be more than happy to, Kyle Kendrick is a former Phillies pitcher. He had one bad season for the Rockies. I don't know, Kyle Kendrick. But he asked Roy, he's like, can I train with you? And then Roy's like, yeah, you can train with me. Just make sure you get here early. Roy would get to the ballpark at like 5 a.m. during spring training, 5:30 in spring training. And so he would definitely share his knowledge with people. And, it was amazing talking to all these people for the book, catchers that hadn't caught him like 12 times in 2002. Like they would get choked up talking about Roy because he meant that much to him. And they kind of hold that relationship to them so closely to them to this day.
Yeah, the catchers loved that. You told some touching stories there. I love the story too for everybody when you talk about his competitiveness. Kyle Kendrick was really conscientious, so would actually get there, I think, one time at 5:30 and beat Roy there. Well, by God, Roy was going to not let that happen again. And finally, Kendrick understood he better not beat him there or else it was just going to go earlier and earlier. Tell us about the end of Roy's career and what eventually led to his death.
Yeah, so Roy basically injured his back in Game 5 of the 2011 NLDS against the Cardinals, and he was just never the same. He had been putting so much stress on his back over the years. Finally, he suffered some fracture in his lower back. And then in 2012, he just could not. You guys got me. It says in connect. Oh, there I go. He basically could not. You got me?
Yeah, you're frozen, but we hear you. And now we don't hear you. So if you can hear me, you might want to log back in. Well, I see a question for Todd, but we can't answer it right now. Does anybody want to make a comment until Todd can get back in? Put a blue hand up on the screen and we'll unmute you. I don't see any, and that's okay. I'll just go on to say that.
I think we lost him, Greg.
Yeah, I know, but hopefully he heard me and he'll try to come back in. This book goes into detail. The back pain was excruciating, and Roy tries to work through it, and of course only aggravates that back stuff. He was big at that point on denial for these things too. He just was convinced he could get back into the game, and in fact, he couldn't. And he ended up taking drugs for that. He ends up getting hooked on painkillers. And part of it too is that he doesn't know what to do with his life. Baseball was his life. Now, he loved his wife. He had kids, he loved them, but when he was done with baseball, he had no concept of what he wanted to do. And you heard Todd say earlier, he talked about then maybe being a mental skills coach, that he could channel Dorfman. And I think he tried that a little bit. He coached his son's baseball teams. But, you know, he put on weight. He was there. There was no drive anymore. He wasn't.
Unfortunately, I think we're losing Greg as well. Can everybody hear me? Okay, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. There might be a problem with the connection.
You're killing it.
I'm sorry.
Guys, what? I don't know what happened.
Is
You
it
guys
my
got
fault,
me?
Dan?
Everything's your fault right now, Alex.
All right.
No, I think we're okay. Is Greg back?
Hold on a second.
No.
Todd's back.
Todd is back. Yep. Nope. Is he here? There he is. Let me unmute him.
Hi there, guys.
Hey, Todd. Sorry about that. We don't know. We were having some connection problems.
Okay, yeah, I was hoping it, you know, it makes me feel better. I was like, oh my gosh, did my internet just go out?
No, we can hear you. You're a little bit frozen every few seconds.
Okay, let me see what I can do here.
There are other people like Greg got dropped, so I think we're having some connection issues.
Okay, strange. All right.
Todd, if you turn your camera on and off, you'll probably be okay.
Okay, let me try that. How's that? Better? I'm on my phone now. I'm gonna try to
That's good.
get back. Better? Okay.
Is anybody else live?
Hi, Greg.
here.
Welcome back.
Thanks. Did
Right.
everybody, am I the only one that got kicked out?
No,
Oh, I
other
got
people-
kicked out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Todd's back.
I mean-
Todd's back.
Oh, Todd's back, and I know you're
Yeah.
running into time issues. Todd, I mentioned to everybody that Roy for a while was in denial about his back, probably made his back worse during that time.
Right.
Then took drugs to relieve the pain, but eventually couldn't pitch anymore. And then really went into a period of not knowing what he wanted to do with his life anymore.
Yeah, that's kind of a challenge that a lot of I hear from a lot of athletes. Well, in Roy's instance, certainly it was to the extreme. You know, he was dealing with debilitating back pain. He had the fractured vertebrae in his discs, or the fractured vertebrae. The discs had eroded towards the bottom, the lower part of his back. And so he had difficulty just sitting in a chair for more than 20 minutes. You know, he had difficulty sleeping, and he definitely couldn't pitch like he used to pitch. And this kind of goes back to the issue that Roy dealt with his entire life. He always felt like he needed to please people and make people happy. And so Roy, you know, he's like, I got to pitch. I'm making all this money, and I've got these teammates who are trying to get to the World Series. You know, I don't want to let anybody down. And so he started taking painkillers to see if that would help him get through the pain. Well, you know, opioids, everybody knows about the epidemic in this country. And Roy, as strong as he was physically and mentally, he became addicted to them. And it really started to show in that 2013 season, his final year in the big leagues. He just could not get the job done. So then he retired. He's like, I can't pitch anymore, but the addictions were still there. And the back pain was still there. And that was kind of something that he continued to really struggle with throughout his life. He ended up going to rehab a couple times. And, you know, in talking to Roy's widow and family members, they thought that he was before he died in the plane crash, he had gotten out of rehab the second time, and they thought that he was slowly starting to turn a corner. And as Brandy says, like, yes, he was still addicted to medication. He had medication in his system when he died. She's like, but he was slowly starting to get better. And the way I kind of talk about it is kind of like if you asked an oil tanker in the middle of the ocean to kind of just do a 180, they can't just do a 180. They have to really, it's going to take a long time to turn the boat around and go, go in the opposite direction. And that was kind of what Roy was doing at the time when he died.
You're on mute, Greg. Sorry. There you are. Oh. You're muted again.
Now, don't touch it again, Alex. I'm good.
I won't.
All right. Roy was so devoted to doing all this stuff, and then that was no longer part of his life. He did coach his kids' baseball teams. You recall one time where he did kind of a mental skills presentation to minor leaguers in the Phillies. That sounded to me like it went really well, but he hadn't quite gotten his life back together, and the plane issues are unclear whether he was kind of goofing off or.
Yeah, that's kind of my feeling, is that, working with the Phillies as a mental skills coach kind of gave him this new purpose, and then coaching his boys in baseball kind of gave him this new purpose. And so he was kind of like, before he was kind of like this rudderless ship. He's like, imagine for years and years, he had this purpose of getting ready to pitch. And now you're like, I don't have to spend all these hours getting ready to pitch. What do I do with myself? So now he had this purpose, but I think what happened at the end there is he became a little bit too confident flying this plane, which was kind of marketed as this convertible airplane. You can drop the windows down and you can land on the water and jump out and swim in the ocean and stuff like that. And I think he became the mixture of becoming too confident, hot dogging it, is like his dad said, and the drugs in his system, ultimately led to the way he was flying that day, and then, tragically into the way that he died.
Well, I'm conscious that it's now time that you said you had to leave. If you can stay, that's great. If you have to leave right now, I want to wind it up.
Yeah, I can stay a couple more minutes. Yeah, if you want to, if anybody has any questions or whatever.
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions. One, Kerry tells us that he used to drive across the border to the Blue Jays, and they would give free pizzas anytime somebody struck out 7 batters, and Roy got him a lot of free pizzas. So there's a smile for us instead of the sort of sad story. Chris, and I don't know how long this would take for you to answer Chris Moyer's question, is that the process of putting the book together, he wanted you to describe that, but that's a big, all those interviews, it sounds like a time-consuming deal.
Yeah, it definitely was. I basically made out an outline of how I envisioned the book going, based on chapters. And, I ended up fiddling with it throughout the course of time, but I kind of had an idea of how I wanted to get into it. And then I just started figuring out who are the people that I would like to talk to about this. And then, it's funny, you talk to one person, they go, have you talked to so-and-so? He was his high school shortstop. You got to talk to this guy. Have you talked to his second baseman? He's amazing. You got to talk to this guy. And you end up talking to a lot more people. And, it was the more catchers I talked to, I was like, I got to keep talking to these catchers, because they give you great perspective on what Roy was like as a pitcher and as a human being, and, family members and family friends and things like that. And, in terms of writing the book, I would kind of try to knock out, I didn't write it sequentially in order. For instance, if I felt I had enough for the chapter that I devoted an entire chapter to his perfect game in Miami in 2010, I would start writing that chapter, if I felt like I had enough interviews. And then, later in the process, if I talked to Jason Worth, who was in that game, I might do some more rewriting. So it was kind of like I would have, I don't think there's like 23 chapters or so in the book. I might have 23 working chapters at any one time. And if I got a couple good interviews that would fit into a couple chapters, I would I would go through, I printed out every single interview. So I had like stacks of interviews like that high, and I would kind of just go through and highlight stuff that I thought might work and maybe put a number next to it for this could work in this chapter, this could work in that chapter. And it's kind of like almost like putting a puzzle together,
Yeah.
a 2,000 piece puzzle. And you're trying to just going, okay, how does this all work? So it'll turn into one big picture at the end.
How long did it take you to write it?
It took me about a year to write, which is actually not that long. I was talking with Tyler Kepner, who wrote a great book called K, which is kind of the history of baseball's 10 pitches. And he's like, yeah, I had like 3 years to work on this book. I said, oh, really? I only had a year. But it took basically a year of my life while covering the Phillies, and while my wife, we had our second daughter in May of 2019. So that was, last year was a total blur.
And when did it come out?
It came out May of this year, and it's done really well. In fact, they did a second printing almost immediately after it came out, which either means they didn't expect it to do that well and it did really well, or they just didn't print out enough immediately. Either way, they're very happy with how it's done so far. I'm happy with how it's done so far. I've gotten a lot of really nice feedback from people, from Phillies and Blue Jays fans to people that even have had mental health struggles and said that this book kind of inspired them to keep fighting and maybe seek some help, that really blew me away. And then from a baseball side of things, I've heard from like big league and minor league coaches and pitchers saying that, I wish I had this when I was playing, or I think this book can help me out now. There's a lot of great stuff in here that I can use, which is kind of, again, like when we started talking, was kind of in the back of my mind in terms of, why I wanted to write the book, because Roy wanted to continue on Harvey Dorfman's work. And so with Roy not here anymore, I kind of wanted to put all of his thoughts into this book, and maybe somebody would pick it up, a pitcher at the high school level or higher or whatever, just an athlete or just a person. And maybe some of Roy's words in terms of overcoming adversity can maybe help them out. So that's been kind of cool to hear too.
I can see, coming from a totally different background, I can see how that would work. There's a foundation, isn't there, to talk about a legacy? Hasn't Brandy worked on a foundation?
Yes, the Halladay Family Foundation. Roy worked with this group called the Positive Coaches Alliance. And basically because, Roy wanted to make sure that kids had high self-esteem while coming up through the system. Roy actually made parents sign contracts on the teams that he coached and said, if you yell at your kid on the field when I'm coaching them, if you yell at me, if you yell at an umpire, if you are a negative force when your kid is present, you are not going to be able to watch. You're not going to be allowed to come to the games anymore. And I think that kind of goes back to his childhood a little bit. He knew how that made him feel, and that really affected him. And he wanted kids to feel really good about themselves playing sports. He wanted them to have fun. And so he made these parents sign these contracts. And, and parents were on board with it. Because, you're just some average dad. Like, it'd be like if my son played with Roy Halladay's kid, and Roy Halladay's like signed this contract, be like, yes, sir, I will sign this contract. And everybody did, and everybody did it gladly.
So they're trying to promote that through youth baseball?
Yeah, they're trying to promote that. Brandy has talked about maybe doing some public speaking in terms of like mental health struggles. And, because her big thing is that everybody has some sort of struggle in their life, and she said this to me. She's like, something that might be hard for you is maybe really easy for me. Like, I'm like, what is this guy talking about? But something that's really hard for me might be really easy for you. And just because it's easy for you or it's easy for me doesn't mean it's not really difficult for somebody else. And it's important that people understand that. And, Roy had issues. As great as he was, he had issues and struggled with certain things. And that doesn't make him a bad person or a lesser person. And I think, she hopes by sharing that story that, maybe she could help some people. And like I said, that's been a a great part about the book is I've actually heard from some of those people. And so like indirectly through the book, you know, some of her words have resonated with people because I thought she was just really eloquent talking about Roy's life and all of his struggles.
I even think she mentioned that at the Hall of Fame ceremony, didn't she?
Yes,
That
she did. She
Roy would want you to know that everybody has issues.
Yes, absolutely. You know, that was part of her speech, and that was part of her interview afterwards. You know, he's a very special person that did very special things, but he's a husband, a father, a son, just like everybody else is.
Yeah. You know, the only other question I have is somebody said he thought one of Roy's sons was at Penn State. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, Roy's oldest son, Braden, is a pitcher at Penn State. I assume their baseball season got canceled, just like every other spring sport got canceled. And it's funny. He kind of looks like Roy looked in high school. This tall, skinny kid. He certainly he has the same pitching mechanics as Roy. And I talked to him a few times, and he's just a great kid. And hopefully, you know, he can, you know, enjoy some success at Penn State and maybe even get drafted, you know, and maybe enjoy some success in pro ball down the road.
Well, I think you've stuck with us longer than you said you could, and unless you want to stick longer, we could take more questions, but I think probably we owe it to you to let you go to your work.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really do appreciate this, everybody.
I want to show the book again, Doc, The Life of Roy Halladay, and this is available at Tattered Cover. You can order it at Barnes & Noble. I'm sure you can order it online. So anyway, thank you so much. I think you've done a wonderful job.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me. Thank you everybody for listening, and hopefully we'll be back in the stands in 2021. Let's pray for that.
Well, good luck to the Phillies in the playoffs, unless it happens to come down to the Phillies and Rockies, which it could happen.
You know, I will say this before I go. I always love my trips to Colorado every year. And I'm always bummed if I ever, for some reason, can't make that trip. I love coming out there. I love Coors Field. It's one of my favorite places to visit.
Okay. Well, I'd love to see you when you come next time. Take
Absolutely.
care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Any thoughts before we go to Dan? I hope you found that that worthwhile. Dan, let's transition now before we go to the Rockies and the playoffs into Tom Seaver, because it's such a contrast to what we just heard. And why don't you tell folks, I'm going to leave it to you unless you want me to ask you questions, but tell folks how you got to know Tom, and then tell us some about Tom. I know you've got some anecdotes.
Hey, Greg, first I'd like to congratulate Chris Cohen for getting an internship with SABR National. It's always great when one of our members go on to something great, and congratulations to Chris.
Cool.
So I'm really happy, and I'm talking to the SABR National people daily, and they're really excited to have you, Chris.
Way to go, Chris.
So let me give a little background. In January of 1984, I'm a 24-year-old person in the baseball operations office of the White Sox, traveling with the club daily, and Roland Heeman is our general manager. And little did I know how much my life would change. We had a compensation draft back then. When you lost a free agent, you were able to pick from the unprotected rosters of every club. You got to protect 15 players, and every organization top to bottom was available. So Roland and I stayed till 1:30 in the morning on a snowy January night, and I found Tom Seaver's name unprotected. Went into his office. We talked a lot. We had 4 or 5 players. Dan Plesac was one of them. And after combing the rosters of all the clubs, he decided he was going to take Seaver the next day. Well, Roland was notorious not being a very good driver in snow. So one of us always had to take him home. And this time it was me. So I came outside of Comiskey Park at about 1:45 in the morning. We were getting about 10 inches of snow that night. And my car something looked wrong in the middle of the employee parking lot. Someone had burglarized my car, knocked out 3 windows, including the windshield. So Roland says to me, how the hell are we going to get home? I said, we'll get home. We'll just clean out all the glass and I'll drive you home. There's no way you couldn't let this man drive. It's not good for society at the time. So we cleaned all the glass out. It was really a blizzard, cleaned out the windshield, drove about 15 miles an hour down, and Greg, you'll know this, Michigan Avenue between 35th and the Loop.
Yep.
Not exactly the safest place in the world, but
No.
we drove by, dropped him off at his condo, and he said, Danny, you'll never forget this day. You lost your windshield, and we got Tom Seaver. And he was dead right. It was awesome. Seaver elevated my game so much on and off the field. It's stunning. Easily the most, I think he was the most unique combination of intelligence and instincts I've ever been around. Stunning intellect on and off the field, the most well-read player I've ever been around. We used to exchange hardcover books on every road trip, and it was just mind-boggling what he would read. He would go over every pitch of every game after the game with Carlton Fisk, and I would sit with the two of them, and we'd go over every single pitch, why he shook him off, what he was thinking. It gave me such keen insight, but he also forced me to watch the game from a very different perspective, would challenge me constantly. And Greg, he was like a kid in a candy store. He was, he joined the White Sox with 266 wins. He's 39 years of age. He's already going to be a Hall of Famer. And he saw the American League as this great new challenge, but also exploring American League cities, because he was as inquisitive a person as I've ever been around. And it kind of gave me the okay to be that same guy. So we would just go everywhere in these American League cities, and very little of it had to do with sports. It was going to a museum, it was going to a historical site. But a couple things I want to bring up. Seaver, first of all, wasn't maniacal like Halladay. The most well-read man in the room, knew exactly what was going on in the world, wasn't obsessive about information, was great at interacting and gaining information. He had this unique whistle during the game. He would whistle me down from the mound. I'd be sitting behind the plate, and we had sign language for various things about where to pitch guys, where his velocity was. And I told Greg a story the other day in his 300th win. He looked in to the stands, and he was struggling in the 8th or 9th inning, and he wanted to know what his velo was. So I gave him a heads up, and I told him 93, 94. And he gave me this head bop, and he was feeling really good. Well, he was 89, 90. But there's no way I was going to tell him, because if I was, he'd been in big trouble. For me, probably the most memorable game I've ever seen, his 300th win, a complete game win in New York City. It was remarkable. And I know the difference between Halladay's dad and Seaver's dad. Seaver's father was a Walker Cup captain, and Seaver's father kept Tom well-rounded. Tom was easily the most well-rounded player I've ever been around. I would argue he's the greatest right-handed pitcher of the modern era. But a couple fun things he left me with, and we stayed in touch all the way until about a year ago, when my last visit, I could just tell he was no longer there. He had dementia and Lyme's disease, and it was really troubling. I remember sitting in the driveway of his home just crying because I realized my friend was gone before his body was gone. But Tom had this thing that Rube Walker taught him in the mid-'60s when he was the pitching coach of the Mets, that there were 5 plate appearances in the game that were the difference between winning and losing the game. And the key for Tom was you had to feel that in the moment and get that out, or pitch around the guy to get the out from the next hitter. Something I'd never heard anybody really get in depth on. It's usually the manager says, I'm going to walk him. Well, Tom would pitch around guys and get to the guy. But he would have those moments during the game. and then after the game, asked me when those 5 moments were. Fisk and I would marvel at Tom's ability to figure out when those moments were. You don't win 311 games not figuring something like that out. But the other thing he did, and I think it's amazing, Greg, is that he was a great teammate. You know, here's a guy with a resume that was Cooperstown-esque when he joined a 99-win team that had been in the LCS. And we looked at him as deity. And he had time for everybody if he let you in his inner sanctum. It was hard to get in there, but once you got in there, you knew you were there. Funny as heck. Oh my God, Greg, what a wicked sense of humor. Even during the game, he would see things and point them out that were just remarkable. But this guy was amazing. I was there for one of the funniest moments. Kirk Gibson hit a rooftop home run in Comiskey Park. It was one of the last rooftop home runs in the old ballpark. And it was a 2-0 changeup. And let's just say it didn't work real well. So Tom gets off the mound, walks towards second base as Gibson's rounding the bag and tips his cap to Gibson and says, that might be the longest ball that's ever been hit. So Gibson's looking at him like, what the hell are you talking to me for? So after the game, we talked about it. Fisk got on him a little bit. And Tom says, guys, that's like 520 feet on a changeup, 2-0. He goes, man, you got to be good to hit a ball that far. That was pretty good. So Gibson's next time up, Gibson thinks he's going down because he thinks that's what Seaver came down off the mound for. And Fisk goes, no, you're not going down. He was pretty admired about your home run. And Gibson was really tentative in that at bat. And after the ball game, I said, were you ever going to drill him? He goes, drill a guy for hitting a bad pitch 520 feet? Heck no, that's an achievement. But he was a great guy. And I'll tell you what, Greg, the coolest thing about him was he was the ultimate professional on and off the field, but always maintained, I would say, a really wonderful disposition where the game never absorbed him. He absorbed the game. And he was always the guy who was there, you know, to say hello to a handicapped kid, to say hello to a new teammate, to take a new teammate out for lunch. He was just that guy. And you don't find too many great players that are that good. He was that guy.
He must have had some drive, though. I mean, he had to be really committed to being excellent.
Amazing. Went over every roster on the night before he pitched with me. And it was in detail. Where do we go? Where do we not go? Is he a first pitch fastball guy? How does he handle changeups after fastballs? How can we sequence this guy best? And then, you know, this is 35, 40 years ago, we used to shift. And he wanted to know where guys were going to be shifted because he would pitch accordingly. So when we went to Cleveland, he and I are shagging balls in center field in batting practice. The old Cleveland ballpark was 420 to center field, and the ball didn't carry at night. So we're goofing around catching fly balls, and he says, you watch in my next start, you watch how many balls come out here. He said, I'm going to see if I can get 10 fly balls to center field. I think he got 8 that night. And it was just the way he could manipulate the baseball. You know, and Greg, there were days with us, 39, 40, 41, he'd throw 97 miles an hour. And then there's other days it was 91. So when it was 95, 97, he'd whistle at me in the first inning, wanting to know what it is. And then it was playtime the rest of the game for him.
Dan, would you explain to people why you were spending so much time with Seaver? I mean, you were not Fisk, you were not a player. Just explain your role with the team at the time.
Well, I knew on September 17th, 2020, we were going to talk about him. So I just wanted to have content. That's what it was.
No, I want to know. I want you to tell folks what.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Right.
My first 19 years of my career were with the White Sox. And I was Tony La Russa's kind of right-hand man along with Dave Duncan and Charlie Lau. I did pitch type location, scouting reports, just traveled with the team on a daily basis as we tried to basically out-prepare other clubs and have more information from a technical and video standpoint than any other club. And I think we succeeded in many cases. And Seaver looked at the information as being a huge advantage to him. You know, here was this superlative and intellect and instincts combined with all this information. It was extraordinary. I mean, you gave him information and he would literally utilize it the next day in the first inning. And he would come up to me after the game and say, you know, you were right, what you said, you know, I'm going to just exploit him in the next start too. So it was fascinating. And Greg, had it not been for him, there's no way I go on to do what I did in my career, because he made me watch the game so closely and so instinctively that I really elevated my observance of the game, you know, around everybody else. I could always tell the rest of my career I was watching the game closer, and I would always call him when I realized that and say, hey, thank you. You know, years ago, you instilled that in me, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, you were only 24, 25 at that time, right?
Yeah, I was a kid. I was the assistant GM his last year. I was 26 years old, and it was just fascinating to have that relationship, and the relationship continued all the way until about a year ago. So I coveted that relationship because he was that good a guy.
Yeah, what a wonderful story, Dan. And just to note, so that, you know, we remember Seaver with the Mets. Then he goes to Cincinnati on a story that I don't think we need to cover, but pitches for Cincinnati for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years.
Yep.
And then goes back to the Mets. So the Mets,
right,
they were hated when they let him go, basically. Then they bring him back, but then they alienate their fans again because they don't want to pay him much, so they let him be picked up. They didn't think anybody'd pick him up. The White Sox pick him up. He's 39 years old, and in the next 2 years, he wins 15 and 16 games. And, 39 years old, and he's pitching 236 innings and 238 innings. Really did a good job for you guys as an elderly baseball player.
Oh, he's terrific. And the phone call, I was there when Roland called Frank Cashin of the Mets to tell him he was going to select Seaver. And the silence on the other end of the call was the first really business call I've ever been on. And it was astonishing. You could, the silence was deafening because the Mets gambled and didn't think that we would take him. And, he pitched really well for us, but he really raised the bar in the clubhouse, Greg. It was a very young club, and it elevated all of us to take the game as professionally and as seriously, but also being as well-rounded as we all could be.
I checked how much he was being paid, guys. So Seaver gets $6.6 million over his career. Get this, when he was 39 and 40 and 41, he made a third of his total income. The Sox signed him to contracts the first, I think it was
the first time, Greg, he ever made $1 million.
Yep.
Was with us at age 40.
Yeah, and then the next year, roughly the same thing. And so if you have his last 4 years, he makes half of his income because that's right as salaries are exploding.
That's right.
So he got right in on the end of the gravy train. Hey, anybody want to ask questions? I think we can open this up.
Greg, I think we got
Kurt's
one.
message.
Yep.
Initially he was upset about being left unprotected. Jerry Reinsdorf and Eddie Einhorn and Roland Heumann did a fabulous thing. They flew him to Chicago to meet with us. We had just come off a great season. We won 99 games. And we were just trying to convince Tom that he could make the difference in us winning the World Series, and he could be the mentor on the pitching staff. He loved La Russa initially, and loved him a ton from that point forward, and really loved Dave Duncan. So the White Sox did a great move, basically recruiting him like a high school quarterback because he could have retired. He turned out to be absolutely unbelievably positive about being with us. And I think it's because of the way it was handled. Taught me a great lesson to treat players with the ultimate respect, regardless of the situation, because it paid off.
Would you consider Roland Heeman your biggest mentor?
Oh, without question. Without question, but Seaver's 1A for me. I think Seaver on the field, right behind him, LaRussa, but Roland just taught me the way to do the job best, to communicate with players directly, to communicate with the media professionally. It was a really wonderful foundation at a very important time in my career.
Yeah. What a great, thank you so much for sharing. Hey, any other questions?
We have a couple, Greg.
Yeah.
There's one
Chris,
from.
I see Chris Moyer's question. We had the reigning Cy Young Award winner, Lamar Hoyt. We had Richard Dotson. There's a great story written about him in The Athletic this week. Floyd Bannister was on that team. We had a really good rotation. We had the best rotation in the American League, and then we added Seaver.
Hey, Britt Burns?
Yeah, but Britt was hurt at that point, had a bad hip. That's my buddy. That's my golf buddy. But he was physically never the same after that 93 season. I think he had 1 year in 84, but it was hobbling almost the entire year.
Do you remember the game that Burns pitched at the end of 83, the one hitter?
Are you talking about the Tito Landrum bomb?
I don't know. We'll talk about
that. Was Tito Landrum hitting the home run in the 10th inning to beat us.
No, whole different game. Let's talk about the playoffs now, unless any other questions for Dan about Tom Seaver? Because then we'll go to the playoffs and open up the mics.
Can I just say it real quickly?
Pardon?
Can I say it real quickly instead of typing it?
Sure.
Okay. I thought I saw somewhere that no hitter faced Seaver more than Lou Brock, and no pitcher faced Lou Brock more than Tom Seaver.
That's correct.
Can you just say a little something about Lou Brock, I guess?
You know, I saw Lou Brock play a lot. I got to know Lou Brock, one of the nicest men I've ever met. So humble, revered in St. Louis. The people with the Cardinals organization adore him. I know a lot of his former teammates. Lou Brock was one heck of a good guy. But the thing that I found out about Lou Brock was Lou Brock had ginormous power. I mean, ginormous power, Robert. He went into the center field stands in the Polo Grounds, which is absurdly long. And everybody was trying to get Lou Brock to shorten his swing and be a little bit more of a contact guy. And he finally did it when he's traded for Brolio from the Cubs and the Cardinals. And Brock told me once, he said, I wanted to be a hero every time at bat. And then I found out my legs were actually my biggest tool. So, you know, he was a really good player, a Hall of Famer, but a much better human being. What an exceptional guy.
Let's have everybody unmute themselves for this following discussion, okay?
And Greg, I apologize. I have to get off the call.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Great moderating. I loved it.
What are the odds the Rockies make the playoffs, Dan?
0.
Okay, there we go.
No, it's a little above 0, isn't it, Dan?
9% from StatCast, but
there you go.
I want to do one thing.
The problem with the Rockies is it's way too long a season. There's 60 games. If they could have just had a 14-game season.
Hey, everybody feel free to
Very good,
unmute yourself. Yes, it was 14-gamer would have been perfect. Since then, they had 3 losses with their first 11 wins, and they've had 23 losses in their next 11 wins. So go from 11-3 to 11-23. Let's first of all talk about what the playoffs are going to look like, and then talk about the Rockies' chances and what you think of the team. Yeah, does everybody know that the first round is going to be played in the home team's ballpark? And so it's a 3-game series, all in the home team's ballpark. They're doing that to encourage teams to want to play for playoff positions. And then they're going to go into the bubble type situation with the division series being in Houston and Arlington for the National League, and division series being in LA and San Diego for the American League. And then it's going to revert to, for the league championship series, to Arlington for the National League and San Diego for the American League. And then the World Series is going to be played in Arlington. So, and they hope to have some fans, I think especially for the World Series, but maybe for some of the other playoffs too.
Greg, can I throw out a trivia question?
Yeah, sure.
This year, as you indicated, the entire World Series will be played in one ballpark in Texas. When was the last time an entire World Series was played in one ballpark?
I know the answer, but does anybody else?
Chris knows the answer.
Chris,
I do.
tell us.
1944 Sportsman's Park in St. Louis, the Browns against the Cardinals.
Okay, how about the time before that?
Boston. They did it in Boston, played them all back in the early 1900s.
No, that's not that's not the time before St. Louis in 44.
Probably the Polo Grounds would have been the Giants and the Yankees before Yankee Stadium was built.
Right. 1921 and 1922. Consecutive years, the Giants and Yankees shared the Polo Grounds until Yankee Stadium was ready in 23. So that was the time before.
So now that we know what we're striving for and that 8 out of the 15 teams are going to make it, anybody want to comment on what you think of the Rockies or their chances?
I agree with Dan, 0.
Yeah, well, I mean, we got the Dodgers tonight for 4, right? And we've done so well against the Dodgers last few years. Yeah, right.
That's the Rockies, by the way, are absolutely at the average point on runs scored. I mean, exactly with the major league average, but they're exactly one run that they give up exactly 1 run more than they score. They're probably lucky to only be 4 games under 500. They're 29th in ERA and pitching. Only Boston is below them.
Bad news, good news. Well, John Gray is out for the year, out for the season with a sore shoulder. But thank God Wade Davis is healthy. He's been activated. And I know everybody's heartened by Wade Davis's return. We got a lot of smiles out of that one.
That's I did this little thing right now. Cincinnati or St. Louis, one of them get to be the other guaranteed team in the National League Central. That is, unless Milwaukee comes up. But take one of those out of the wild card situation. So you have them being a half game behind Philly and San Francisco. Milwaukee's 1.5 back. Colorado's 2 back, and the Mets are 2.5 back. 2 games out isn't a lot of games, but you got a bunch of teams in front of you. So by my
he will be the series against the Giants. If they can somehow split against the Dodgers, the key series will be the 4 games against the Giants because the Giants are ahead of them.
that could work.
Aren't they also chasing the Marlins for that spot though?
That too.
I mean, you've got 8 teams within 5 games of each other.
Yeah. Right now, the Marlins
one's got to be in the East, one's got to be in the Central.
The Marlins may win the NL East. They may win the NL East.
They're only 2.5 back. They're 1.5 ahead of the Phillies for that second spot. And there's another way to look at it too. How many games is it going to take to get there? Now, you could get there with 30 wins. I'd say it's possible if you play 500. The Rockies would have to be 8-4. 31 is probable. 9-3, almost certain would be 32 games at 10-2. Although that it's possible that wouldn't make it either. But yeah, so are they? Can they go 9-3, which is what I think they'd take? It doesn't seem like it, does it?
It's about mathematically possible, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Has anybody heard these teams that aren't going to be able to complete their games? I guess it just comes down to winning percentage. There's a lot of them that I don't think will be able to get the 60 games in.
No, that's a fact.
The only one, they're probably going to get all 60 in for everybody. The only one that doesn't right now is St. Louis. They would probably have to play two. They have a doubleheader with Detroit that hasn't been scheduled, but other than that, everybody else should be able to get their full 60 in if they can get through the rest of the season.
But Kurt, it's winning percentage. It's always been winning percentage, so it does not matter if they don't get there. They're just going to look. And by the way, there will be no playoffs. Does everybody know that? They have a complicated system of tie breaks, so there's no playoff games here. If three teams tie for with 30 wins for that last wild card spot, they just got a series of tiebreakers they're going to go through.
I don't know how the commissioner sleeps at night. I really don't know, going through this.
Well, this has been quite the season, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Any thoughts about what's happened to the Rockies? I know Pat Saunders, I love this. Here's why I don't take mulligans in golf. Saunders originally picked the Rockies for 29 or 30 wins, I think. And then after they were, they were 13-4, actually. They'd lost a game. He takes a mulligan on a Sunday story and now predicts them for 36 wins. Not a good move, Patrick. So they
it's just interesting to see, teams like St. Louis and Miami, who's had all these double headers on their schedule and being so competitive, while the Rockies have had no double headers at all and struggled so much. Next Friday's doubleheader against Arizona is the only doubleheader they have this entire year. Well, St. Louis will have 8 to 10 doubleheaders, and Miami will have 5 to 7 doubleheaders they've had to deal with.
St. Louis has done a hell of a job given what they faced.
Yeah, and then play with 3 doubleheaders this week, and then another doubleheader with Milwaukee next week. It's insane, and they could still have a good chance to be a 2 seed in the Central.
Yeah, absolutely, they do. Of course, they're in a very weak, certainly the weakest National League division, and the Rockies are in the best division in the National League. So,
I think 2 things. Greg keeps bringing it back to the Rockies. We can't hold leads. Rockies can't hold leads, and they can't get a clutch hit when they need it. There's they're leading the universe in the worst batting average with runners in scoring position. So lethal combination.
Yeah, I think I saw last night on ESPN, they showed that both the heading into yesterday, both the Phillies and Rockies bullpens were both at 6.82 ERA. And you see they're both in the similar predicament heading in down the stretch here.
Well, they've certainly just got great pitching performances. I mean, that's nice. So,
well, let's hope that pitchers and catchers can report in mid-February in a brave new world.
Well, that's all I got, folks. If anybody else wants to take over, talk about something, I'd say go for it.
If I could just thank Alex and Greg one more time for their
thank you
for their presentation of our Zoom call. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome, Paul.
Well done, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
I think this might be an appropriate time to end the call then.
Okay.
Okay.
Stay safe out there.
Thanks,
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Nice to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.